A little less than a year ago, I was still serving as a local elected official on the Board of Supervisors of the Special Taxing District where I used to live in Miami-Dade County. And there was a project that was coming up. It had come up before. I had managed to talk down my fellow supervisor who had kind of pushed this project. Nothing out of this world, but again, it's just spending other people's money on something that nobody wants, as usual. And like I said, I talked him down from it once before, but the thing came back up, and it had caught some steam with the other supervisors. I had managed to kind of, and with getting some of the people who were going to be affected and didn't want it, got it to get cooled down. They went through a few iterations of the project, but it came to a point last November where they had a couple proposals, and I was pretty much convinced that this was just it. This was going to go through, and I wasn't going to be able to do anything about it. I was convinced of that, and something really interesting happened, because we had the meeting, and there's a section of those kind of meetings, it's called a workshop section, where they present this stuff, and then they have the public comments. And of course, the people who were really more closely going to be impacted by it were the most outspoken. And it was rough. It was very uncomfortable in terms of the feelings between. There was a lot of nasty words thrown out. People were called communists, and people were called racist, and all sort of stuff. But we got to the end of that part of the meeting. And as we finished up with the public comments, it was time for the board to reconvene and make a decision about what we were going to do. And I asked them to consider the cost. And when I say consider the cost, I made sure I said to them, I'm not talking just about the money. Consider the cost in terms of what it's going to do with the community. Listen to all the angry people who were just talking, and all the animosity that's going to be there, and it is only going to grow between the board and the residents in that community. And an amazing thing happened after talking a little bit about that, was that my fellow supervisor then, who had pushed for this project for quite some time, decided, you know what? I think we're going to take a step back. I think I agree, we shouldn't do this. And the remainder of the supervisors all took a step back, and the project didn't happen. Do we consider the cost, and do we have leaders who consider the cost? And again, when I say consider the cost, when we talk about what we've been seeing recently on the news with the departure from Afghanistan. Now, $2 trillion is not a trivial cost. For some perspective, I think that's around half of what the national debt was when the war began. What is the cost in the human lives? Upwards of over 2,000 U.S. soldiers killed out there. How many more that came home with PTSD driven to suicide? How many Afghans killed in the field? And we know a whole lot of them were not fighters, as we're drone bombing hospitals and weddings and schools. Consider the cost. How different would our policy be if we considered that cost, if we considered the human cost? In the drug war, a lot of money gets spent, but put aside the money. How many communities are overrun with violence because you create an opportunity for organized crime to sell a product? And how do you gain market share in a black market? You don't do it by selling a better product. In a black market, you do it through violence, through turf wars, and who gets caught in the crossfire. We've all heard the stories. We've all seen examples, and they flash by in the news, and we forget about them afterwards, unfortunately. But have we considered that cost in human lives? Have we considered the cost of the people who end up in prison because they were growing a plant in their house, or because they were caught with the wrong amount of a substance that somebody thinks they shouldn't have? No matter what you think about how good or bad those substances may be, doesn't even matter. What matters is violating a person's rights and the cost of doing it. Immigration is another one. We've got internment camps full of kids in inhumane conditions. We've got millions of people living in the shadows, undocumented, inside the country. We've got other people who are trying to go the legal route, waiting years in this sort of visa quota purgatory. What's the cost of all that? And now what we see, again, going back to Afghanistan, with all the people who assisted the U.S. that are stuck in that kind of limbo, not able to come, no matter what promises were made, because of these policies. Have we considered the cost after 100 years of this? Because we're going back to the Immigration Act of 1924, where we set these kind of rules. COVID mandates. lockdowns, some people thought that, well, it would save lives, but did they consider the cost? A lot of libertarians that I heard were talking about from the very beginning. We were going to be a spike in incidents with mental health, suicides, domestic abuse. So much that was going to come out of this. Not just the economic harm, which again isn't trivial, but everything that cascades down from that. Any kind of policy that is defective in this way, that's not based on an understanding of the principles of individual liberty, that the role of government is to uphold the individual's right to life, liberty, and property. Anything that deviates from that will always fail. No amount of resources put in, no brilliant strategy, no amount of brilliant organizing or the right personnel, having the right person in the job. It's not going to make a difference if the policy is so flawed, if the policy is wrong. It will always fail, and you will do more harm than good, and you probably might not even do any good anyway. As I speak, I say to consider another cost, because you guys are all here. This is a fundraising dinner. As you guys consider the cost of offering support, and I'm sure you consider the cost as you purchase the ticket, and you consider the cost as you donate to any campaign, I ask you to consider one more cost. Consider the cost of doing nothing. Consider the cost of sitting on the sidelines. I got a lot of reasons to sit on the sidelines. I got, as I was telling, I've got my 3 kids. My oldest is just starting middle school. My youngest is turning 2 in a couple months. Make a lot of sense to just stay home and not drag myself out here and put out and do this or file to run for the U.S. Senate. Be very easy. But what happens if I don't do that? Maybe the same thing will happen even if I do it, but I know what will happen if I don't do it. I know what will happen if we don't step up and offer people an alternative. They're going to have a Republican who will still vote for all this bad policy and will push for nationwide red flag laws and more central economic planning, tariffs, and trade wars. Or we'll have a Democrat that will probably continue to vote in lockstep with their establishment. So consider the cost of doing nothing. Consider the cost of not taking action. Whatever you can do to support Mike, Martha, myself, any candidate, or the movement as a whole. As you consider the cost of doing it, consider the cost of not doing it. For me, the reason I've decided to take action is because I think that cost is too high. It's too high for me. Okay? Maybe nothing will change, but I can't tolerate allowing it to be that way. We have to understand the cost here and be moved to take action. And that's really all I can say. Thank you guys for your time. Thank you, Mike.